So hello everyone. This is one of the very kind of common series event called In Conversation. From time to time, Time to Change Kingston runs those events during which we have people speaking about different aspects and different topics. Today I wanted to, and I still want to, focus on the theme that was introduced by the World Mental Health Day, and the theme was mental health in unequal world. As this really touches the aspect of, us having different status, having different, cultural backgrounds and whatsoever, that may pose certain barriers to accessing help when it's needed. That theme, however, at the beginning caused a lot of thinking on my side, at least, because I was thinking, like, what is it all about? So I was sleeping on it and thinking about it, and then I wrote a poem that is a little bit hard and strong, but it really reflects what happened to me and what happens to many of us, which I'm going to read at some point in a second. But firstly, I need to forewarn you that that meeting is recorded, and if you don't want to appear on the recording, just ensure that you are not on the camera. For some of you who have technological problems, it will be really convenient because you should have a better quality of that meeting. So because we have another guest joining us at about 7:30, perhaps before touching the subject of the poem and what it talks about and inequality there, I would like to perhaps talk with you, Tony, about some stigma associated with talking therapies. There are still many people, believe it or not, that imagine going to the therapist in a kind of, Freud style, if you know what I mean, right? There is a couch, you will be laying down and talking about your childhood and your libido and you name it. So, could we perhaps talk about what people could expect from talking therapies? What is it there that should attract them to that particular help? And how does it look like from inside the therapy room?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So I suppose the first thing is, you still can find therapists who will give you the Freudian experience, but you need to go looking for a thing called psychoanalysis. I coincidentally happen to operate from a chiropractor's premises, and I work in his soft tissue room when it's not being used as a soft tissue room. So I find myself having to explain to people from time to time that actually, lying down and free associating is not what I'm expecting them to do. But it probably makes sense to give you a simplified perspective on the kinds of talking therapies that you might find and what those approaches might be, and from that you can kind of infer what the experience might be like, I guess. And I suppose it might be worth doing that in a kind of chronological order. Mm-hmm. So we talked about Mr. Freud, and there are a bunch of other people who live in that kind of world, and also called Freud as well, his daughter, for example, Adler and Jung and people like that. And there you're really in a world where you are thinking about how your early life has shaped the person that you've come to be. And a lot of that will be thinking about and dealing with the past, and how that's framed how you are in relation to other people, and Freud was initially really quite concerned with how you are internally, how you are intrapsychically as opposed to interpersonally. So, you know, the things going on inside you as opposed to the things going on in the space between you and other people, which is more what later forms of therapy try and deal with. And there are a lot of people who fit into that kind of space who aren't, strictly speaking, doing a thing called psychoanalysis, but they are working developmentally, and they'll be thinking about things like how attachment work between you and your primary caregiver, for example. The works of people like John Bowlby, a guy who, you know, primarily the reason now why people were very reluctant to take children away from their parents. You know, he did a lot of work with young children who were evacuees in wartime stuff, you know, and how young people bond to their caregivers and stuff like that. And, you know, motherhood, and how what they call the dyadic relationship, the mother-child unit kind of developed. So that's all the psychodynamic therapists. And that sort of came along first and was in the kind of late 19th and early 20th century. And of course, a lot of stuff that was going on then, you know, people were creating, you're an artist yourself, you know, a lot of art was concentrating on the unconscious. That's another thing that Freud kind of promoted, is an idea that we have unconscious, subconscious lives. And you know, edged out into World War One and all the kind of carnage there. So a time when people were thinking very much about people's lives, not just in a physical terms, but in terms of, you know, what was going on inside them. And then moving on a little bit, you get into the cognitive behavioural people, and the person that nearly everybody's heard of is Pavlov. You know, so ringing a bell,
conditioning,
making dogs salivate as a reaction to as external stimulus. And the thing that, you know, cognitive behavioural practitioners are kind of proposing is the idea that if we influence how people behave, we can almost kind of reverse engineer how they think, and if we can reverse changes to how they think, then we can reverse engineer how they feel. That's the kind of proposition. And all that was going on again at the kind of time of things like Taylorism, you know, what's it called? When you build motor cars and everybody does a little piece, like a conveyor belt of manufacturing. So, you know, thinking of people in quite a mechanistic kind of way. So where Freud was living in a time of great, you know, conflict, cognitive behavioural, Fordism, thank you. Yeah, Henry Ford and all those kind of guys, was operating in a time when, you know, it's bugging me that, anyway, operating in a time when, you know, construction and automation was very much a thing. And then we fast forward a little bit and we get to a world where, and this is primarily a thing that's kind of springing up in the States, where we're living with a very different view of the world, and we're thinking about people growing, and that's the kind of humanistic school. And then, you know, early thinkers in there are people like Abraham Maslow. And Maslow kind of looked at, not from a kind of deficit model about how people were ill, but he was looking at high achievers. He was looking at how, you know, that people who highly achieve, what are the things, what are the components that make up their success, their viewpoint in life. And self-actualization was the top of that kind of model. So people who realise their potential, and humanistic practitioners will be looking at, what are the barriers to people growing, and what is it that we can do to removing those barriers so that they can flourish, really. And they're very much more working in the moment. So when the psychodynamic people are kind of saying, what was going on for you before and how is that affecting you now, humanistic practitioners, and the famous ones in these kind of spaces are people like Carl Rogers, who's the guy who invented a person-centered counselling, and Fritz and Laura Perls, the people who promoted Gestalt and things like that. They're really saying, well, let's work in the moment. Let's use the relationship that we've got going now as a vehicle for seeing whether we can create the environment for personal change. And can I appreciate you as a person? Can I give you what they call a core condition? So a genuineness, empathy, and unconditional positive regard are the things that counsellors working in that way are trying to exercise. They're saying, I accept you as the person that you are unconditionally. It's like love, really, is what they're trying to do. All of this in a kind of non-judgmental kind of context.
That's amazing kind of history journey, indeed. And it's funny how different aspects were considered in different time frames, and how one almost negated the other, and how it grew, which is lovely. However, now, there are so many different schools, right? And I assume each counsellor would have been trained by a certain approach, right?
Yeah.
But when you are offered counselling, I never had a choice to choose what type of counsellor I will be linked up with. Why is it so? Is it not important for my well-being to know who I'm supposed to be meeting up with and deal with myself?
I mean, now we're getting into a thing about what the private sector and the public sector, the kind of differences here, because primarily it's getting more diverse now, but in the public sector in the UK, the cognitive behavioural approaches are generally the kind of type of therapy that you're typically offered. Hello, it's got word from Sue.
Well, I can hear you.
NHS doesn't offer much choice, but indeed, that's what your money gets you, really. I suppose if you have the luxury of being able to afford therapy, you can pay the piper. Really, you can choose the kind of therapy and the kind of therapist that you can have. Mostly, as I say, if you're relying on NHS provision, you're probably using a thing called an IAPT, because that's a thing that's been introduced in about the last 10, 15 years. That stands for Improved Access to Psychological Therapies. And it's a kind of program-based approach to introducing the mass capabilities around England and Wales, anyway, for people to access talking therapies. Very much, certainly initially, based around CBT. And I think, there's probably a couple of things going on there. One is that the CBT practitioners and the CBT infrastructure have done a lot of work around measurement of outcomes. There's lots and lots of evidence-based stuff supporting CBT interventions. And of course, spending lots and lots of government money probably encourages the people who commission these kind of services to head in that direction, because they want to be able to prove the outcomes that they're paying for. There's also, though, I wonder, and this is kind of my prejudice, really, a thing about it being very much the spirit of the age, because a CBT very much says, this is how you change yourself. There's lots of, squeaky pens, do some of it in a workshop-like environment. You can talk about, how the caveman runs away from the saber-toothed tiger, and you can encourage people to kind of take away their own interventions and practice them away from the talking therapy. And that the age is kind of somewhat, fix yourself. That's kind of what we get. Kind of what we get
Yeah,
in the UK,
which
in
is
the
good,
Western world.
empowering the person in question to make a change and to work on themselves is good. But let's face it, it does not work for everyone.
No, indeed. A very big thing here, I think, is that one size does not fit all, one approach does not fit all.
This phrase, that is why I was probably, people say that they can see what I think because I have very expressive face, and you probably saw that sarcastic smile on my face because IAPTs improved, right? Even that phrase is like, well, maybe it is in improvement stage still, but I'm not sure that it's fully improved.
Yeah.
Yeah,
indeed. And if you engage with an IAPT, that you can see that in the process. There are forms that are used to measure how you are. Now, there'll be a little matrix that says, how often do you feel this way? And down the side, it will say, not very often through to all the time. And increasingly, you're being asked to carry out those measurements. And I believe in some cases, almost every session, which takes this from a before and after almost into a thing which becomes quite fixated around measurement. So getting back to the experience of free at the point of delivery. Well, I don't say free at the point of delivery. It's being paid for with your taxes. You'll primarily come across cognitive behavioural approaches. I think there's a bit of leeway in the kind of therapies that IAPTs can provide now, and increasingly they are providing a wider range of things, but they're measured very much to a national framework. So that they deviate from this approach at their own risk to some degree.
We have a comment that it was an improvement based upon what was received before, and don't get me wrong, I do understand it. However, I think that we still have a big and huge journey in front of us, because, like you said, it brings a change. It is judged as helping. Let's say, I don't know, 70, 80. Do we know percentage? 70, 80 people benefit from CBT.
So I can tell you about the figures for Kingston, I suppose.
Yeah.
With Healthwatch, I did a kind of review of the ICOPE service in Kingston, and I know that it helps about 6,000 people a year, roughly. Although of those 6,000 people, about 4,000 people actually go into the service. So something happens to deter the first 2,000 from actually going in, and of those 4,000, about 2,000 complete the course of therapy that they've been given. So there's some questions in there about what is the experience and how well does it fit with what people are looking for, I guess, really.
Yeah, we have our other guest, Tabby, joining us. We are in the middle of a hit conversation about unequal world when it comes to mental health. It's like, I do understand it helps many, but there is a percentage that probably it's somehow evidence that is saying, no, it didn't help me. So what then? What if I depend on NHS? CBT was nonsense to me, let's say, and what else NHS can offer me?
Yeah, I mean, it's worth saying what we've talked about so far are the people who are living with some kind of mood disorder, so depression, anxiety, that kind of thing, and that's what IAPTs are kind of designed to cater for. There'll be people who've got other challenges in life, and they might be kind of lifelong challenges in life, who will also be interacting with other parts of NHS provision, and that will probably be people in the care of community mental health team, or new there is some new terminology in that kind of space, but so there's a whole range of folk out there needing different kinds of help. And of course, it's true to say as well that those folk who are being helped by the CMHT also, like everyone, are subject to anxiety and depression. So there's a crossover between them. And yeah, there is a big question: what happens if CBT is not your thing? If you're deemed needing an intervention which is more
tailored to my needs,
more tailored, or more serious, let's say, than the IAPT is geared up to provide, but you don't merit an intervention from the CMHT. There know lots of people who fall into that kind of category in the borough. So it is a real question. And yeah, what are the solutions there? We touched on if you have the financial wherewithal, you can buy help. But what happens, and it's increasingly the case, you don't have the financial resources to buy help.
Yeah, and because this is the problem, don't get me wrong. I can always only base it on my own experience. I'm a very capable person. CBT was great, but in the aspect of, I felt that it was good, but in some way it contributed to my poor well-being, because as a highly busy person, with very full agenda, I felt that I am added task to that agenda, and that I was stressing and being anxious that I can't fully do those exercises and homework. And then I was feeling very guilty that I am sabotaging my well-being. And I think I had those opinions from many people who attended CBT, that it is not very good approach for people who are extremely busy like myself, because it adds to the anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As suggested earlier on, there's very much an aspect of CBT which loads the responsibility on you to be the person who fixes yourself. And if you're already an anxious, busy person, that has potential challenges.
Exactly. And there is also about CBT that you are taught, lectured, and introduced to certain techniques, strategies, you name it. But what happens, and we know it from psychology, right? If that certain strategy or learned pattern is not reinforced, not repeated, you wave bye-bye to it at some point. And this is what happens to me. It works well in first instance, I had, and then busy life, busy thing and all that, and I forget about that and I stop practicing it. Then I'm finding myself at the rock bottom again. And there is a good question summarizing this, what I said, given by Steve. Do we know how many out of these 6,000 people helped by CBT in Kingston return for help?
Ooh, probably someone does. I don't have that in my head, but I suspect that there's a proportion of those people who did come back.
From my own experience, from the system that I've got, I obviously don't know these patients personally, but a lot of the people that are under my care at the moment, a lot of them have got what we call repeat episodes. So on their care notes, it says how many times they've come back to the service, how many times they've used the service. It also says if they were discharged from the service and the reason they were discharged from the service. And from all the people that I've got under my care, I can tell you about 90% of those people have returned to the service.
Oh my God.
That's a big number, isn't it?
The time between those episodes varies massively. Like we've got some people from the 90s that, not the 90s, sorry, from like early 2005, I think is the earliest I've seen, that have got maybe 1 or 2 episodes, which is not too bad, but then you've got people that are returning like every 6 months or so.
Interesting. Could you tell us, if you can tell us, if you can't, it's fine, what service you are talking about?
So I work for iTalk, which is an IAPT service within the NHS, and my service currently covers all of Hampshire, and there's, as far as I'm aware, there's a load of them all over the UK. But I specifically cover the area of Gosport, so everyone that's on the Gosport kind of area I take care of, and I kind of look after until they're put into therapy.
Amazing, but shockingly sad, I'm sorry to say.
But the reasons that they have repeat episodes vary wildly. Like, some people weren't able to get in contact with them for months and months and months, and so they were just naturally discharged from the service because there's no point having someone on a waiting list that we can't get hold of. Some people, for example, someone I spoke to the other day, they were so anxious about receiving therapy, they asked to remove themselves from the wait list, and I had to explain to this person that they were referred for a reason, they wanted this for a reason, but they were just so anxious. And there's so many reasons why people return. Like you said, Dorota, they might just have a busy life, they might not have been able to put those skills into practice. Some people have a fear, some people feel like they dealt with one problem and they need to deal with another problem, which is totally reasonable.
Yeah, it is shocking. So yeah, this what we said, it's like, in my poem actually would fit here very greatly. So I will quickly read it. Equality is an illusion. I am accused of delusion, as I live with demons in my head. So I am the crazy one instead. You look, but cannot see, beyond a nonsense decree which contains more delusions than my brain, while the society is pronounced sane. With the long waiting list to receive help, thousands just suffer, scream and yelp, taking their lives to end the pain, marking your hands with a blood stain. As there is no equality in this society, if we live or die depends on prosperity, the fortune of having all the deeds, to avoid the queues and be freed from the mental health receipt, from the void making it unbearable, from the risk of being irreparable. Ill mental health, however, acts equally, knowing no race, no status, in dimming your life ungracefully. And this is it, really. And this is how I feel about it. It's like, don't get me wrong, it's like I have good job, but I have a family to look after. I have a mortgage on my head. I can't really sacrifice, like, what would it be like in brackets, Tony, privately to attend counselling once a week for an hour? In brackets.
Yeah, around here from about £50 upwards per session.
Per session. So we are talking £200 a month. That's not happening. You know what I mean? And how many there are that would say the same? It's like it will be either, paying my my electricity and gas bill or going to therapy, so should I freeze and have no hot water or get better mentally? So there is no equality, really, is there?
No. I mean, it's worth qualifying that a little bit, in as much as there are some low cost counselling operations, like again, talking around here, Release, that operates from the YMCA, you could be talking as little as £25 for a session, but it's still, if you're living on JSA, ESA, these kind of things, it's not practically within your reach. And I suppose the other things to pull out at this point are, lots of things that wouldn't be classed as a talking therapy, but are good for you. Access to nature, creativity, access to other people, associating with other people. These are things that can happen, and of course, this fits into that little social prescribing thing that's kind of very much a thing at the moment. So
yeah, what is happening with it anyway? Because before COVID, there was a huge campaign about that, and now it's like hardly anything I hear about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think those initiatives are still. The thing is that they're geographically based. So in Kingston, you've got a thing called Connected Kingston, which is a little website, and there are people trained to use the website to find, what the opportunities for kind of social solutions are, but they'll be different. As soon as you move to Merton, you move to Richmond, the approach to doing all that is different. So actually finding help, can be really quite challenging, because the makeup in every borough, and this is probably a factor of the commissioning environment really, the makeup in every borough of the voluntary sector and the solutions that have been used to stitch it all together by the local authority will have different names. There'll be, different collaborations going on. And you're worried about yourself or the person that you're caring for. You shouldn't have to also be a navigator of how it all works local to you.
Yeah. Of course, but my problem is that, it's like, don't get me wrong, but when I was really, really in bad state, you could sing, songs in front of my window about nature, and I would say, show you probably some very abusive hand movement. You know what I mean? It's like, when I'm down, the planet can be sprinkled with gold, but I just can't make myself to engage in this. Mm. So it's like, how many of us is in that state that can't even reach out for help? And what happens to those? Yes, we have helplines, right? We have certain services in emergency, of course, but I recently had a friend who told me that she called, I will not name what kind of helpline, just not to give them bad reputation, because I'm sure that it was just the operator in charge at that point that was a bit unskilled, I would say politely. And she was just said, she was just told, okay, just go out and take a few deep breaths and everything will be fine.
That's atrocious.
Yeah.
It is. So my question is, those helplines, do they have people who are very well trained, or they are people who just try to kill time?
It's a hard question to answer without naming the helpline, I suspect. I mean, I've got a lot of time for the Samaritans, for example. I can't imagine that would be a response you get from Samaritans. And the training would depend on who it is that you're expecting to talk to at the other end of the phone. And do you have a view on this, Tabitha, at all?
I think it's a difficult one. I think when you've been through this kind of industry, you tend to get a feel of how to appropriately respond. But for someone who may not have gone through something so intensely as someone on the other line, it may have been difficult to understand where they're coming from. So it's so difficult. Like, the operator may have been having the worst day possible, and they really might not have sympathized with the person who was calling. It's such an individual basis, and it's so hard to kind of generalize that to the entire company. I understand that one bad person could lead to a horribly negative view about an entire company, and as we all do it's a social bias.
Yeah.
But again, that person, the operator, might have just had awful mental health, and they might not have been in a position to help that person, which is bad for the company, and they should really, ironically, improve mental health services within that company.
Yeah, and there is also another aspect to it. So those helplines, okay, and then when you are feeling unwell, what you are asked to do, to go to a GP. And my question is, how much training in mental health they do have?
It's a bit of a lottery, I think.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that I don't understand why, when I am having fever, feeling unwell, I can call at 8 a.m. To my local surgery and say, I need to be checked. Why, when I'm in mental health distress and mental pain, I don't have the same service? Something is not right there.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about models of healthcare that go back for decades, really. When we're talking about hundreds of years, probably, GPs in this country. So the the psychological component of their service delivery is really what you might traditionally call bedside manner, really, which is, you know, treating the patient in a professional and calm and empathetic way. But that's not the same as saying this is a person who's received specific guidance, training in working with somebody in a, you know, in an informed way.
Yeah.
But then it begs the question. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, you go.
But then it begs the question: what would you expect to happen if you were in a mental health crisis? What would you want to happen? Because I don't think I would know. I've been in a mental health crisis before, and I have had absolutely no idea what I'd be expecting. And I've studied psychology and mental health for over 4 years. I had no idea if I turned up to A&E at midnight on the verge of doing something really bad. I have no idea what help I would expect or want even.
Exactly.
So then how do we help the people if we don't know what we ourselves would want in that situation?
Yeah. That's a tricky one, isn't it? But perhaps if there was some kind of I don't know, standardized approach, because don't get me wrong, if I have suicidal thought and I really think about harming myself, I'm going to emergency and wait 7 hours to be seen, right? Of course I will just wander away and then probably proceed with my thoughts, right? That this is not how it's supposed to be. And GPs, for example, you know, I could write a book about what horrendous stories and approaches I experience from GPs. And it's like the first ever, even my son can confirm, youth, you know, 19 years old, that the first answer to whatever mental health distress disclosed, would you like to go on antidepressants?
Yeah, I mean, they're working in an environment, quite a pressured environment, especially now, you know, and they're expected to do what they do within, you know, like a 10-minute window. How are you really going to help somebody in a relatable, you know, in a meaningful way? You're probably not going to have a lot more time than to do an elementary bit of triage about risk and offer somebody some chemicals, you know.
To add to that, Tony, as well, is that doctors are the only people that can prescribe medication, and it's all that they've had their training on. So their job is to technically treat with medicine. They don't have the same training as psychologists do, but their entire world is to prescribe medication, and they're the only people that can do it. And if that's their only method of treating a mental health crisis or a mental health illness, that's what they're going to do, because there's other people that can do the rest of it for them.
When you get there after 6 months of being on medication. And the point is that then we are ending up with the society who is highly medicated by psychotic drugs that have no awareness of what really is happening to them and what horror they may face when want to go off them, which is another aspect. Yes, if you are trained to prescribe medication, you should be able to provide information of what you are really prescribing to me.
I absolutely agree with you.
This never happens. If not that I am the psycho who reads those little print on the leaflets, I would be killed probably by now.
I mean, there's a whole discussion about, you know, the relationship between the pharmaceutical industry, the incentivization of the use of medication, and the relationship between all that and the prescribing process, which is, you know, of concern, because, you know, that increasingly is the answer that you get.
So do you think that we will ever achieve equality between treating physical and mental health? Will I ever be able to call my doctor and say, okay, GP is busy, but there is a mental health nurse that could see you for 5 minutes?
Well, the only way I can see that is that the standards for treating physical health are coming down because of the pandemic, and that it actually gets sufficiently low that it'll equate to how we're supported in mental health. You know, it's also worth noting that the statutory provision in terms of healthcare in this country is being kept below inflation increases over 10 years. So, the tools to provide both physical and mental health care are eroding, have been eroded and continue to be eroded. So it's not heading in a great direction.
Yeah, but so why do we, have so much noise that we are facing mental health pandemic, that so many people are in distress, so many people every year take their lives, and there is hardly anything done to make it better.
I mean, you want a kind of top-level philosophical viewpoint. I would say that modern life is not designed to be good for humans. I think modern life is designed to provide a good return on shareholder investment. So it's perfectly natural that human beings would not prosper in the world that we've made. In the Western medical, Western industrialised nations. Sorry, Tabitha.
No, I was just going to add that that's a wonderful viewpoint that you have, but I was also going to say that people are becoming more aware of it now. Like back 20, 30 years ago, people didn't really understand autism. And now look at us, we're thriving and living with people who have got autism spectrum disorder. But it's the same thing with all mental health. People are becoming more aware of their own mental health, and that people are aware that they're able to speak up about their own mental health instead of just suppress it and put it down to nerves or shock or anything, kind of a natural reaction, shall we say. People are now able to speak up about their feelings. And I think that's why we're facing a mental health pandemic, because people are finally seeking the help that they deserve and are entitled to. But on the downside, it's now putting a strain on the mental health services.
Yeah. So actually, socially, we've made some real progress.
We have, but there has been a downside to it.
Yeah.
That's true. And there is always. I get a bit annoyed, and don't get me wrong, I have been there on very low income, struggling to provide food for my children. I was on benefits for several years, but now I'm not. And all possible help is always to those who are on low income, which is fair. I understand that they need that help, but I would like to know why I am paying NI contributions of £100 from my salary and I can't even receive desired help, or at least proper help, because there is a question about speaking to pharmacists about combination of drugs, and believe me, they are very knowledgeable, but what they say, that's not my role to advise on medication that your doctor given, because doctor's supposed to outweigh the pros and cons and whatsoever. So you have no help there. Anywhere you turn, you hit the brick wall, and I'm tired of it, really. Because even GP doesn't know that the two drugs prescribed to me in combination could literally put me in suicidal psychotic mode. So I feel that there is no help for me. And it's like, how can I change my mindset that the people out there are not to harm me, but help me? Because at this point, I reached a paranoia, that I'm scared to go to the doctor. Because I'm scared that, again, they will put me in awful stress over their, I don't know, is it lack of knowledge or just ignorance?
Yeah. And we're not even getting into, people whose liberty is deprived of them under, the Mental Capacity Act or Mental Health Act or whatever, for whom those choices are not available. So it's a scary world in some.
I'd actually like to disagree with you, Tony.
Mm-hmm.
So people that are under the Deprivation of Liberty Safeguarding Act, I think they're more well cared for than you think. So I've worked in a psychiatric hospital, and I've worked very closely with the nursing team. And those medications that inpatients have, they're monitored so regularly that you wouldn't believe. Like their intake of food, their intake of medication, their intake of air is measured on the daily basis. Every movement they make is recorded. So any change in medication is noted, and it's so well supervised. I applaud the people that it's a wonderful kind of experience, because you get to see, so for example, an old patient of mine, I can't remember the medication he was on, but it was extended. So he was on a depot injection every 2 weeks. And I was warned that his medication was changing to every 3 weeks. So we were looking out for side effects. We were looking out for incidents and things like that. The entire nursing team and the entire hospital was informed about any potential changes in his behavior. So people that are sectioned and people under doles, they're very well cared for. And although they have got their rights taken away, it's not likely. Those people that are under doles, they are very extensively assessed to make sure this is the right decision for them. Inpatients are cared for unbelievably well, and it's really sad that people are scared of being sectioned, because the care that people receive is astronomical. They are beautifully cared for. Nurses, especially mental health nurses, they do an incredible job. Nursing teams, for example, like healthcare workers, they care for their patients so much. It's not just a day job to them. They're friends, they're carers, they're supervisors, they're medics. They play such a vital role, and all the patients are cared for, and their medication is carefully selected for them. A downside to that is they do go through a trial and error system. If they see what medication works better, then they will put them on several until they find the right combination of therapy and medication, but they are very well cared for.
Which is good to know, actually, because people have that fear that it's like, what was that movie, the cuckoo, the flight over cuckoo nest, or whatever type of care, isn't it? But this leads me to something, before I read a very good question. But yes, in those psychiatric wards or whatever, you have a team of people who will look into what is prescribed, what dosage, what side effects are. Then I'm extremely suicidal. I attempted suicide. I'm going to my GP. He's saying or she's saying that I can't have therapy until about 6-8 months. So meantime, I'm receiving antidepressants in high dosage, and I'm sent home. There is no information provided to my first of kin or whoever lives with me what they should look for, because we know that psychotic drugs in first instance make you feel worse, right? So nobody to monitor me, and I am asked to come back in 2 or 3 weeks. I may not make it until then, right? But my beloved ones are not informed what to look for, and I am not in the state. I am an ill person here, right, to inform and educate my partner what he needs to be looking for in terms of warning signs. So there's something wrong there, it's like, it's not really how it's supposed to be. We are putting people at risk by doing this that way.
Mm-hmm. I'd have to say my experience of acute services and reviewing acute services here, which may not be, so I'm in Kingston, may not be what your experiences in the south, seem to be more about containment rather than anybody actually being helped to recovery. And of course, there's what's your experience, what's my experience, and where does it come from, and who am I bumping into? And a lot of my,
of course.
The people that I'm connecting with are people who are giving me their anecdotal experiences. So, I leave it there.
Of course. But have you ever heard that a person receiving the first kind of frontline approach and being prescribed psychotic drugs, should there be a policy about informing someone who is close to them about what they are put on and what the side effects might be?
I'll defer to Tabitha here, but I think that there are, not everybody has the same relationship to the people around them. Their loved ones are not necessarily the people that they would want to have making decisions about their medication.
No, I absolutely agree.
But why, when something happens to me, let's say I was in an accident, then first of kin will be asked if my organs can be donated. Then they can decide, right? But when there is my life being wasted here, like, will I kill myself or will I be okay or not? Nobody seems to care. I disagree with it. I think that everybody has first of kin. Somebody should be informed what those drugs may cause, like side effects, and what to look into in first few weeks. I think that this should be mandatory. But of course, it's my opinion.
I have a varied opinion on your point of view, Dorota. So I'm assuming a lot of you are aware, in most instances of mental health, there has been some trauma or some neglect or some bad upbringing. A lot of the cases that I've seen, a lot of these people don't have a next of kin. A lot of these people don't have families around them to support them. A lot of the time they've come from a traumatic background and they're potentially still in that traumatic background. And a lot of the time, most of the time, these people are over 18. And yes, I think in response to that, there should be training provided to the person that is receiving the medication and not to the next of kin. So they should, this is actually ties in with your earlier point, you should be given information regarding what could happen. But again, medication is such a varied thing. No one person acts the same. I've seen people on the same medication act completely differently and go either end of the spectrum. And it has just gone absolutely.
Of course, I agree that the situation may vary, of course, and I should be informed. And let's say that I should be properly informed, not to read the leaflet, which I may not read. However, this brings me to the aspect of some countries already adopted the policy of having the person that I can appoint to act. Like I live with ill mental health for years and years. Let's say that I'm reaching the stage that I can't take decisions for myself. And let's say that I am in an abusive relationship or I have some traumatic circumstances. And then somebody else who is probably my abuser or whatever will take decision. Should I be sanctioned? Should I be this? Should I be that? So why can't I still appoint someone that I trust to act on my behalf, or to be that person who could be informed about what may happen to me?
That's a very interesting point, actually, because in the mental health psychiatric services, you do have advocates who act on the behalf of a lot of patients who obviously don't understand the internal workings of a hospital or of the system. So I think that's a really good point. I think introducing an advocate system who has a knowledge base of medications of mental health would be so useful, especially in GPs' offices, because then people could inform them if it's a right choice. They could obviously make a point to the GP and say, is this the best choice? Could you go through the side effects, the possible effects this could have on this person? This is their history. What way could this potentially go, so that they are informed? That's a very good point.
Yeah, because, don't get me wrong, like when you are in pain, physical or mental, you are not in your mental capacity to really be lectured and educated what may happen to you. Because being frankly, at some point I was saying like, maybe better, maybe that side effect I really want to happen to me, because then my misery will be ended. You know what I mean? But yeah, let's go to the question, which I lost because it moved. Okay. More and more the term trauma-informed being used as opposed to mental ill health. Psychologists are also introducing the power threat meaning framework rather than diagnosis. What are Tony's and Tabby's views on this new way of looking at supporting people through mental health?
Okay.
I'll be honest with you, I'm trying to remember what a power threat framework is, but I can't bring it to the front of my mind.
Yeah. I mean,
do you want me to, I asked that question, Tabby, do you want me to go through it? So
please,
the power threat meaning framework is a new perspective on why people sometimes experience a whole range of forms of distress, confusion, fear, despair, and troubled or troubling behaviour. It is an alternative to the more traditional models based upon psychiatric diagnosis.
Yeah, okay. So I mean, I think what we're edging into generally is the helpfulness or otherwise of diagnoses, and then the whole, what effect does a diagnosis have for a person, which is quite a subjective thing, and you can have lots of different flavours of diagnoses. In fact, diagnoses change. That's part of the nature of the world that we're in. We refine our thinking under the Western medical model from time to time. Every now and again, the DSM comes out with a different version, and there's an international classification of diseases as well, So the whole terminology about how people are changes, it evolves. Generally, we diagnose so that we can bring big organs of supply to meet people's needs. We chunk up how people are so that their needs can be met by something that's repeatable. and the diagnosis fulfills that function. It says, if you have this, we can give you this thing, we can give you this treatment, these kind of things are appropriate, this is how we can measure outcomes, all those kind of things. But having diagnoses has an effect on people. Sometimes people have different relationships to how they feel about a diagnosis. And you're very much in the world of state provision and big private sector provision when you do that. So working in private practice, I'll keep any views I've got of what might be going on for this person to myself, really. I won't put those labels on that person unless they want me to do that. Some people find that helpful. They say, it puts a name to a thing that I've been struggling with. Other people take that away and then start becoming the diagnosis. They're extreme examples. But really what we're doing here, both with traditional diagnoses and modern ones, is kind of making sense of the complexity that is the human experience in such a way that some kind of help can be applied. And how much you make that visible to people and the effect it has on people varies based on people's experiences. I'm sorry if that sounds a bit vague, but it's a very big subject and it is hugely subjective.
Totally agree. I think we're looking at the power, threat, meaning framework is just one aspect. It's a bit like all those modalities you talked about, but it's an interesting new way of looking at things. Whereas before, doctors just see signs and symptoms, but what they don't see is the whole person. I might come in with a stomach ache, but actually it's stress related because, I've got to pay the bills next month or something like that. But a GP won't ask that question. No. A GP will say, what's wrong with your guts? That's the bottom line of it. What's the problem with your guts? What sort of things are you showing? But he doesn't talk about the whole world around you because you get 10 minutes each if you're lucky. And that's the challenge with the whole service, isn't it? That's why things like social prescribing are being introduced more. But that was just a question because I think it's we tend to try and compartmentalise conditions. And like you said, Tony, you hit the nail right on the head. It's a subjective experience of life, generally.
Yeah.
And also, I think trauma does, I think Tabby alluded to it, I think trauma plays a massive part in most mental illnesses. That's my own perspective on all the people I've met. When I get to meet them on a really personal level, there's a trauma of one sort or another. Some people argue we're born with trauma because the birth experience is normally traumatic for the baby. I would argue that actually there's a safety aspect to it being in the womb in the first place, but for some kids it isn't safe even in the womb because of the way what goes on in that household. So there's a lot of aspects to it, but I would argue trauma. I think Tabby mentioned about a percentage of people with CBT. I think that percentage applies to traumatic people with trauma in their lives, and it doesn't have to be the severe end of the trauma scale. I'll share with you as a group that my most traumatic experience was breaking my leg badly when I was 12. And that's what drove me to a lot of the anxiety that I experience now through an accident. So it's like a post-trauma in a way. Yeah. And that's a very simple thing that people think, well, a 12-year-old breaks his leg. But it was a massive thing for me and it still is. Yeah. So, I think trauma has a massive part to play. That question's never asked by a GP. They don't ask that question.
But anything can be traumatic. So in the DSM, I understand that it's not the best example to use, but in the DSM for the description of post-traumatic stress disorder, you can develop that disorder from hearing about a traumatic incident, from someone telling it to you. Anything can cause you trauma. Trauma isn't subject to war crimes and sexual assault. It's anything. It can literally be it can be having a conversation with a friend. It could be breaking a leg. It could be falling over in the playground when you're 10. It can be anything. Trauma is not subjective to just people that fight in wars and experience sexual assault.
And the trauma is not the actual thing that happens. It's what your body carries after it. Yeah. And a lot of people forget that. They don't understand that to start with. So if something's happened to you and you take it with you, other people can just say, no, bat it off. I've accepted it and it goes. But not all of us have got that capacity.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's probably worth making the point that trauma per se is a natural body's reaction to a stressful experience. It's when it stays around past its usefulness, almost, that it becomes, you know, psychopathology.
Yeah. I was just notified that, you know, we are exceeding the time given. So I think we will need to meet at some point again, because the topic is definitely not exhausted.
No.
I would conclude that as we humans are so complex beings, we need more complex services in place and more money that we know how it's spent. This concludes probably our chat and our conversation.
Or simpler lives which are more values based, or about a better set of values than the ones we have, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much. I apologize if at any point I came across as aggressive. I do when I'm passionate about something, and my mental health I am passionate about because I want to get well and I want to be well. Yeah, but thank you for coming. Your opinions are so important, and I think that we will need to meet up again, maybe have another theme, more kind of, you know, less holistic, and chat about it.
I think there's some really great stuff in the chat I've seen popping up, and I don't want to lose that. I mean, I think there's a wider conversation than the four of us about some of the richness of the stuff that's in the chat.
Yes. If Sarah could save the chat, would be great. And I know that Sarah wanted to run a quick poll, just to, you know, have some feedback on the event. So I will let you, Sarah, to perhaps launch it. Yeah, there it is.
Hold am I? Oh, am I? How do I work this?
Tony, I think it's because you're a host, you can't do this.
Oh, I can't play with it.
I can't do it either.
Okay. I'll just let it happen.
Tony, the fact you and I can't do it's going to bring the average age down quite a bit, so I'm quite pleased about that.
We'll get the view of the young people here.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Good night, Sue.
Thank you very much for everyone who joined. This will be uploaded to Time to Change Kingston YouTube channel, so you will be able to rewatch it. So those who registered to be here but couldn't be here will be directed to that YouTube channel.